There are two types of people in the world: software engineers and normal people. In this video, I want to break down some of the differences between software engineers and everyone else. I've been an engineer in Silicon Valley for my entire career, starting out as a founding engineer at a startup, to an Android engineer at Pinterest, to a staff engineer and manager at Meta. So I have a pretty good idea of how software engineers think and the culture around us. In this video, I'll explain two things that normal people do that make no sense to software engineers, and vice versa. Two things that software engineers do that don't make any sense to normal people. The first thing that normal people do that software engineers find really confusing and even frustrating is using the mouse too much when interacting with the computer. Software engineers have a really hard time resisting using a shortcut or a tool which makes them more efficient. I actually have a funny anecdote here. I was recently working with a non-engineering friend, and they were working on a task which required them to do some text editing. So basically taking some rows and columns and formatting it and arranging it in a certain way. And it got to the point where I got visibly flustered to the extent where my friend asked me if something was wrong. And what was wrong was that they were doing something so inefficiently. I was just watching them work, and they kept going back to their mouse and doing something which should have taken maybe half a second. It took them literally 5 seconds to do. And I got so frustrated. You know, I like to think of myself as a fairly tolerant person, but I draw the line at wasting time and doing things inefficiently, like my friend was doing by not using the keyboard shortcut. This sentiment is shared by pretty much every engineer I know. The idea is that we have these devices, whether your computer, your phone, or any computation device, which is so extraordinarily powerful, and yet we don't know how to communicate with it properly, and we end up doing things in a very inefficient way. There is a spectrum here of varying degrees to which you take efficiency to an extreme. On one end, pretty much everyone I know, whether software engineer or not, at this point, we all know how to open and close a new tab in the browser using the keyboard and not by using the mouse, right? The second degree of this, the second level, is are you using a window manager when you use your computer? So if you have your browser, a text editor, another window like Spotify on your computer, are you able to navigate them and position them on your screen without having to use your mouse? And then the third level too, which is the holy war of Emacs and Vim. Right? So Emacs and Vim are two of the most popular command line based text editors that programmers will use. And it's always a constant debate about which one is better, which one's more efficient, and which one should you actually use. Emacs is clearly the better choice, but the debate still rages on. The only thing I'll say about Vim users is that they are like the people at a party who don't know how to leave the party without screwing something up. So definitely Emacs is the better choice. The good news with my non-engineering co-working friend is that after I explained to them the keyboard shortcut, they actually started to use it pretty regularly, and our friendship was actually saved. The second thing that normal people do, which makes no sense to software engineers, is to join the beta program for an application on your phone, like Messenger or Pinterest. Most companies will have something called a beta program, which is a way for end users to get early access to the newer version of the software, of the app or game. In almost all cases, joining the beta program makes no sense at all, and most software engineers would agree with me. With the beta program, you are signing up for a buggy version of the software which hasn't been tested as much. You're effectively signing up to eat the dog food for the company, trying out features which may not work as desired, and you literally get nothing in return. The dog food that these companies put out is usually not very good. That's why it's called dog food. You don't want to typically eat that. The way releases work at pretty much every company is that there will be a new version of the mobile application every 1 or 2 weeks. And so the beta population, maybe 1 or 2% of the user base, they will get the newest version of the software maybe a week ahead of time. And then the company will look at various health metrics on that beta population. Things like the crash rate or the performance latency, or the core KPIs, whatever the company is tracking. In almost all cases, the changes that you get by getting the software 1 week in advance are probably things that you don't even care about. Things like logging changes or tiny design tweaks, or an experiment that you have no idea about, but it still hurts your user experience because you're getting a less tested version of the software. It's only after the metrics look good for the beta population of the app that the company will then feel comfortable shipping it to 100% of users. And so that's why it kind of boggles my mind that you have millions of people who are voluntarily signing up for the beta program of applications like Airbnb and Pinterest and Messenger. This actually became a point of contention while I was working at Meta. As an employee at Facebook or Meta, you are forced to use the pre-release versions of the application. And that's a big issue because if there is instability in the apps, which there often is, then you won't be able to use these applications like you normally would. There were multiple instances where I was trying to send a message to someone using the Messenger app and it would insta-crash for me. I literally wasn't able to open up the app and send a message. So now that I've left Meta, the apps Instagram, Messenger, Facebook are a lot more stable for me, but it was really frustrating for employees. And if employees had a choice, I would guarantee you that most of them would opt out of the beta program. They would want to use the more stable version of the software. Similarly, for normal people, I really would encourage you not to go into the beta program voluntarily. Instead, you should prefer to use the well-tested, hardened code that comes out for most users. Now let's talk about things that software engineers do that make no sense to normal people. First, the common frustration with software engineers is that they focus way too much on the code and the technology. You can actually interpret this as an extension of the very first point in the video, which is around the frustration that software engineers have around normal people using the mouse. If you take that attitude to the extreme, you start to realize how powerful computers are, and you effectively start shoehorning all the different types of problems in the world to fit into the solution of writing more code or using more computers. And that is simply not true for many of the problems that exist in the world. It's like the expression, when you have a hammer, everything becomes a nail. And so software engineers will try and use code, which is the primary way that we communicate with a computer, as a solution for any type of problem. So for example, you have an unhappy customer, just maybe write some code and provide a discount code in an automated way, and that will solve the problem. Are there concerns around fake news and bots? Maybe you can have a technological solution rather than actually fixing the source of the problem. But the best software engineers know that there's so much more to being a good engineer and a good employee beyond writing code and leveraging technology. You have to be able to build a strategy, you have to work with different teams, you have to deliver feedback. In fact, the gap of these skills that I've observed among software engineers is the whole point of the startup I'm building called Taro. Join Taro.com, check it out. I'll leave a link in the description. With Taro, we're collecting the highest quality discussion for software engineers to advance their career by focusing on the non-coding part of the job. And it turns out that the more senior you become, the more important the non-coding parts of the job become in your success in the organization. Taro brings together really credible people at top tech companies, leads and managers, for discussion and live events. You can think of it like Blind without the toxic negativity, and like LinkedIn without the toxic positivity. The second thing that software engineers do, which may not make sense to normal people, is that turning on and off the machine is actually a pretty good solution to a lot of the problems that you might be facing. The classic joke for any issue with a piece of technology is to reboot it, turn it on and off again. And surprisingly, this actually is a fairly effective way of dealing with problems. Fundamentally, the job of a software engineer is to manage state. So you have to manage numbers and names and make collections of data. And when that information goes out of date, or you lose track of it, or it's incorrect, that is where you run into problems. That's where you run into bugs. Sometimes the easiest way to deal with a problem is to throw away all the state that you've accumulated and start over. And that's what happens when you reboot the device. You're able to have a clean slate and try again with the device. I'm actually speaking from personal experience here. When I was at Meta or Facebook, I worked on a hardware video calling device. And the issue was that this device was plagued with tons of memory leaks. Basically what that meant is as you use the device, making calls, just normal operation, the system resources would start to get depleted. The number of file descriptors, the number of threads, the available RAM, all of that would get used up to the point where the device became unusable. And so for me, and pretty much every other engineer in the organization, the first line of defense when something went wrong was just, let's reboot the device and see if the issue can repro. And by the way, this is the reason why software engineers really like to get bugs which are easily reproducible. The most frustrating issues are those that happen randomly, because it becomes so much harder to diagnose and apply a fix and be sure that you actually addressed the root cause. If an issue happens non-deterministically at some point once you reboot the device, it's really hard to test and make sure that you've addressed the problem. One interesting way to look at the gap between software engineers and normal people is to look at how engineers and hackers are portrayed in mainstream TV and film. There are some pretty ridiculous depictions. I remember there's a TV show called NCIS, and there's a scene where they're in a lab and they're getting hacked. And because this lady and this man are urgently trying to defend against this hacker, instead of having one person type on the keyboard, the man comes in and starts typing as well. So you have two different people typing on the same keyboard, which just makes no sense at all for anyone who's used a computer. Forget about engineers, but just like the idea that you could just add in more people on the keyboard makes no sense. Hopefully this video illuminated some of the differences between how normal people view the world and how software engineers view the world. There's a lot more I'm sure that I missed. Let me know in the comments what else you think is a culture divide between the two groups. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.